Hey guys, welcome to part 2 in our series on the Evans Gambit, where we're looking at the top mistakes that players make in the Evans Gambit. This video, we're going to specifically be looking at the rating range from 1000 to 1400 and the mistakes that those players were making. Now, this is going to build off some of the concepts that I talked about in the previous video, so if you haven't seen part 1, the 600 to 1000 range, even if you're not in that rating range, I recommend you watch that one first. But assuming that you've watched that or you kind of already know about the basics, let's jump right in and see what mistakes the 1000 to 1400 players are making. Alright, so just like in the previous video, I analyzed a whole bunch of games and wrote down all the different mistakes that players are making, but specifically for the rating range 1000 to 1400. And if we go to the bottom, again, just like last time, I recorded the overall success. So 18 games out of 34, white got the advantage out of the opening. So 52.9%, not nearly as good. If I go back over here, we had 72% before. And so a lot of that has to do with one particular mistake that I'm going to show you here in a second, but it's still slightly better for white. So if you are going to play this as white, you know, nothing to be worried about here, but it's not as good as in the lower rating ranges. All right, so in the 1000 to 1400 rating range, pretty much all the mistakes boil down to two main categories. Now, there were some other ones kind of here and there, but they were sort of all over the place. The common ones that came up over and over again were these two different ones. And so black made the mistake knight f6, then allowed e5 at the wrong time, and white made the mistake of playing queen b3 at the wrong time. And if you look back to the 600 to 1000 range, very similar to the top two mistakes in that range. So I'm going to talk about those. I am going to go into a little bit more detail so that this isn't going to be exactly the same as the previous video. I'm going to show you a few extra things so that if you're watching them one after the other, you can kind of build off what we talked about in the previous video. So let's take a look first at knight f6 allowing e5. All right, here's the starting position of the Evans Gambit. If black accepts the pawn, we play c3, chasing the bishop away. And if it goes back to c5, this is what I showed you in the previous video. I said I like to castle. And then if black plays knight f6, we can play d4, and if they capture, that's when they get into trouble. And the reason for that was that we would recapture with tempo on their bishop, and after they moved it, we would play e5, chasing the knight away, and then they don't have any, we're good to go. They don't want to go back to where they just came from, and all of these squares are bad. Check the previous video if you want to see more details on that. But what I want to point out is that there's a very important distinction here. When we play c3, the bishop has to go to c5 for that little trick there to work. If they decide to go to a5 or to e7, it changes things. And let me explain why that's the case. Let's say they decide to go back to a5, and we try to do the same thing. So we castle, they play knight f6, and we play d4, just like we did before. They take, and if we recapture, it's actually bad for us now, and here's why. Before, their bishop was on c5. So when we recaptured, we would be attacking their bishop, which is sitting on this square. It's not sitting there now, right? It's over here. So they don't have to move their bishop. It's their turn, and they can just take our pawn on e4. And you might say, well, can I go here and pin the knight to the king? Well, no, because the bishop controls that square for one reason. And another reason is they can play d5 and defend it that way. It's a subtle difference, but you have to pay close attention when you play c3, where do they move the bishop to? Right, if they go to c5, then you can continue with your plan, castle, and if they play knight f6, you can follow it up with d4 and do what I just showed you. But if they go somewhere else, and let's look at another example, like let's say they go to e7, we castle, knight f6, d4, takes. Again, he's just going to take our pawn, and we're losing the pawn, and then he's going to follow it up with d5. It's a good position for black, right? So that mistake that I talked about is specifically, going back here again, after we play c3, it's specifically in the lines where they play bishop to c5. So in the previous video, I know I talked about not memorizing too many moves. So the way that I like to think about this is when the bishop's on c5, when you play d4, you can do it with tempo. And so if they try this knight f6 thing, you have time to play d4, takes, and then play e5 before they can do anything because of the extra tempo that you're gaining by attacking the bishop. If that bishop goes somewhere else, like a5, you don't get an extra tempo attacking the bishop. So it changes things. So you're probably asking, well, what should I do in that case? Well, you can still castle, that's fine. But when they play knight f6, d4 is still good. You want to take control of the center. But when they capture, you don't want to recapture right away. You want to play e5 first, chasing the knight away, right? So you play e5, and after like knight e4, then you can recapture. And now black actually has to play the move d5 to basically defend their knight. If they don't do that, they can get into trouble when you can chase this knight away. So the takeaway is the mistake that was very common was specific to the lines where they played bishop c5. Against bishop a5 and bishop e7, you have to watch out for the fact that they can actually take your pawn, they can take your pawn with their knight. So just to recap one more time, we'll look at the bishop e7 line. If you castle, knight f6, d4 takes, you don't want to take back right away because you'll lose your e-pawn. You want to push the e-pawn forward first, and then after they move the knight, that's when you recapture, and then you can try to trap their knight in the center here. Usually they'll have to escape over here to either g5, or they'll have to play d5 to try to defend it. And so if, like, for example, if they play d5, you can en passant, but then they can recapture with the knight. And this is pretty good for black, actually. You'd have to play bishop d5, but you can't really stop this. If they know what they're doing, this is going to be something that happens. But it's still playable. It's certainly playable for white. You are down a pawn, the pawn that you gambited, but it's still very playable for white. All right, so we talked about this knight f6 allowing e5 mistake, and now let's look at queen b3 at the wrong time. All right, so back to the starting position. Black captures, we play c3, and we'll say black moves the bishop to c5. One move that I saw a lot of players make was queen to b3. Now, they didn't always play it immediately. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they played it after castling. Sometimes they played it after playing d4. It was kind of random when they played it, and a lot of times they played it at the wrong time. They played it when it was not good to do it. So what I want to talk about now is when should you and when should you not play this queen b3 move to try to attack on f7? Because if you play it at the wrong time, you're just going to get into a bad position. If you play it at the right time, you could get a very good position. So it's important to understand the differences. The first tip that I will say is usually don't play it before you've played d4. Okay, and the reason is, like, let's say we play it immediately, right? Black can just play queen e7, defending the pawn, and now you can't play d4 anymore because you needed your queen to support it. If you try to play d4 now, black has 1, 2, 3 pieces. Sorry, 1, 2, 3 pieces. You only have 2 defending it. You're going to just lose the pawn. And he's also got his queen lined up here. It's just not a good move for you anymore. So try not to play queen b3 unless you've already played d4, because d4 is an important move. We've talked about that in the past. You have to get d4 in if you're going to play the Evans Gambit. So don't play queen b3 before d4 is played. The next thing I'll say about queen b3 is if you play queen b3 and black has a very easy way to defend the pawn, like in this case queen e7 is a very easy logical move, it's probably not going to be good for you. Okay, so after this, queen e7, very good for black. Even if, let's say we castle, he plays d6. Again, if we play queen b3, well, he can still play queen e7. Very easy to defend it. And, we don't have d4 in. It's just, that's not the right time to play it. Okay. Another example is if instead of d6, maybe black plays knight f6, you might say, well, I could play queen b3 and line up on there again. Well, now he can just castle. Or even queen e7, but even castling, it very easily defends the pawn. It's probably not going to be good for you. You also have to watch out now for knight a5, where he can fork these and take away your bishop. So if he can very easily defend it, usually you don't want to play queen b3. So let me back up and talk about an example of when you should play queen b3. So after take, c3, let's say bishop c5, castles, d6, d4, takes, and bishop to b4. Now, this is different than what we looked at previously. First of all, we've already gotten d4 in, so that's important. And second of all, the bishop is on b4, so it's a target. I talked about that in the previous video, and some of those lines you saw that queen b3 now was very good because we're threatening this, but more importantly, we also have a target over here. And so after black, let's say, deals with this threat, we can follow up on our second threat, play d5, chase the knight away, I showed you this before, and win the bishop. So you see the difference. We have a target. In the other cases where queen b3 was played, there was no target on b4. So that's one example. And let me show you one more. All right, so backed up to the start, and after takes c3, sometimes people will play bishop all the way back to e7. And now, if we play d4, captures, this is a kind of a weird example, but this is a case where queen b3 now is actually pretty decent. And here's why. Can black defend it with queen e7? Not anymore. Can they defend it with knight h6? Not anymore, because our bishop covers that square. So it's not easy to defend. The only move black could play to stay in the game is knight a5. And then we can capture with check. The king goes over. And this is an important little line that you're going to want to remember. Queen to a4 is the move you have to play. And here's what's going on. So we've captured on f7. Black has lost castling rights, which is a good thing. The problem that we face now as white is that our queen's under attack, which is a big threat, but our bishop is also under attack. And if we try to save both of those, for example, I need to keep my queen on this diagonal if I want to defend my bishop, and I also have to move it because the knight's attacking it. I can't go there. I can't go here because of the pawn. There's only one square that's available, right? But if I go there, black plays c6. Now he's defending his knight with his queen. He's attacking my queen, and my bishop is going to get captured, right? I can go to h5 to try to hold on, but after something like knight f6, I got to move my queen, and guess what? My bishop's gone. So that's not really what you want to do. So if we go back, instead of trying to hold on to the bishop, the way to approach this is to play queen a4, and the idea is we're giving up the bishop, and then we're going to take the knight. So he takes our bishop, we take his knight, and this is actually decent for white, pretty good for white, because black's king can't castle, and we have, you know, some threats with our knight or with our queen coming over. We're going to castle. Our bishop has active diagonals. A lot of compensation for the pawns that were down. So the important takeaway there is, going back, this all started because we played queen b3. We played queen b3 in a situation where black could not easily defend the pawn on f7. Right? That's the key takeaway. Queen e7 was not an option. Knight h6, not really an option. And so it forced him to go this other line, which is pretty good for us. But if we back up, you know, and he plays a move like bishop c5, well, you don't want to go there anymore because queen e7, very easy. But defends the pawn, it doesn't accomplish much for you at all. So that's the key takeaway with queen to b3. I hope that made sense. This is very, very common. Players were playing queen b3 at the wrong time when it wasn't good. And then there was other situations where it was a good move that they should have played and they didn't play it. So if you're going to play the Evans Gambit, this is a crucial thing to understand, when you should and when you should not play queen to b3. And then, like I said previously, the other mistake is understanding when knight f6 is actually a mistake and you can take advantage of it with d4 and e5, and when you have to be careful and lose your pawn on e4. So, all right, well, hey, I hope those mistakes made sense and that you learned something. Be on the lookout for part 3, where we're going to look at the 1400 to 1800 range and see what kind of mistakes those players are making. That's going to be the most complex and advanced video that I'm going to do in this series. I'm going to go into the most detail on that one. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure you understand what we talked about in these first two, and then that last one we'll kind of try to tie everything up and see what's going on at that rating range. But let me know if I missed anything or if something wasn't clear. But as always, thanks so much for watching. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.